Carol Vos-Lavoie, and welcome to this week's show of Metaphysically Speaking, the all-new age show designed to bring you alternatives and options for a much more balanced and healthier lifestyle. Metaphysically Speaking, by the way, is presented to you by DeLiso's Homeopathic Medicines of Las Vegas, Nevada, and the Astrological Institute of Research in West Hartford, Connecticut. I'd like to open with a quote by Ruskin. He writes, "There is in every animal's eye a dim image and a gleam of humanity, a flash of strange light, through which their life looks out and up to our great mystery of command over them, and claims the fellowship of the creature, if not his soul." Well, my two guests tonight have indeed seen that glimmer and that gleam of humanity from the eyes of the leatherback turtle. I'd like to introduce you to John Keinath, Research Assistant at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science in Gloucester Point, Virginia, and also Chris Luginbuhl, who is perhaps the one who is responsible for bringing about this very special research of the leatherback turtles. Chris is the president of the David E. Luginbuhl Research Institute in Ellington, Connecticut. Welcome, both of you, to the show tonight.
Very much.
So glad to have you here, and the work that you're doing is so very special. Chris, we want to point the finger at you, and we want to really blame you, I want to say, for starting all of this special research on the leatherback turtle. And I'd like you to start just a little bit and give us the background, how this inspiration began for you in a very personal manner.
Well, I stumbled on some old photographs of my father that were taken back in 1951. He was on a tuna fishing boat at the time, and this huge leatherback turtle unfortunately had been harpooned, but rather than leave it out there, they decided to bring it into Ellington. So they hung it on this tree back in 1951 in Ellington, Connecticut, and that's how I got involved. I found some old photographs of myself standing underneath this giant turtle, and I decided many years later, after going through unfortunately a lot of pain that I went through during my life, it was almost as if these old photographs kind of led me to different people. I started to show these photographs to many people along the way, and got some of the top scientists in the world to see the photographs, and had them meet with me back in 1981 at Yale, where this turtle had been donated many years earlier next to the skeleton. And it was then when I got one of the leading sea turtle researchers to meet with me there, Tom Carr, and he looked at me and says, what do you want? What are you doing? I said, well, I wanted to show you this picture of my father, of this giant turtle. And he looked at me and he says, Chris, he says, do you realize no one knows about leatherbacks? And it was then when it was almost like a spiritual awakening. It was maybe I'm the one that's going to see if I can find out about this. And I also needed something to get my teeth into. I had been through an awful lot of emotional pain, as I say earlier. I just thank God every day that I'm sober, and you know, God willing, it'll be 11 years for me this year. But it was an adventure in my sobriety. It gave me something to put my teeth into. And many people along the way told me that as long as I was sober, I was available for miracles to happen, and I would be available to do something. And it just seemed as if, at the time, it was what I really needed to focus in on, and it became a big dream for me. I was going to be the one to track the leatherback.
Well, what I'm so pleased about in your story that you've not only shared with me verbally, but also in the written story that you had, you were sharing so much about how the minute you made yourself available, I like those words, all of a sudden all the doors began to open for you. How did you then also come to have a door open and meet with John? How did that happen for you?
Well, I found out that the University of Rhode Island was very interested in doing sea turtle research. And I started trying to find out how I could maybe find fishermen that would work with us and the university to find leatherbacks. And so I arrived in Newport, and through many people I talked to along the way, people I met in some of the mansions, and they finally directed me down to some fishermen in Newport. And they told me not to get my hopes up. They hadn't caught any leatherbacks. They might have caught 10 or 12 in 35 years prior. And it just seemed that everything fell into place. I arrived there on the dock, and the turtle started showing up. It was a real miracle, and the scientists were very excited about getting involved, Dr. Shoup at the University of Rhode Island. And his graduate student at the time is John Keinath, and he happened to have a boat, so that part of the puzzle starts to come in together.
Okay, everything just fell into place for this really to happen, didn't it?
And John was very excited about being a part of it, and it was a real blessing, another blessing in my sobriety.
Now, since 1981, you've been doing, or 1980, right in that time slot, you've been doing a tremendous amount to track the turtles. I think what I'd like to do first is let's go right to the film clips that we have of you tracking the turtles and actually working with them, and explain to us all the whole process, why it evolved and why you're doing this and what the results have been, okay? So let's go do that right now. Let's go to our film clip and see what tracking the turtle is all about.
Okay. This was one of our last tracks on the Narragansett Bay.
Mm-hmm.
First thing you need, obviously, is a turtle. And these are the fishermen from Newport that were gracious enough to spend their time and energy to get one of these monsters onto their boat. You can see that it's no small feat to move a 800 to 1,000-pound sea turtle that's flapping around.
My gosh, I guess not.
You can see that the animal is crying, and you've heard probably of crocodile tears.
Yes.
But that's a salt gland that essentially functions in a sea turtle like a kidney. You can see Chris here standing next to the monster leatherback that was in Ellington many years ago.
Now, this is the one that your father had
yes,
caught.
That was one of the photos that inspired all this.
That animal now, the bones are in display in the Peabody Museum at Yale. This is another big leatherback that was brought into Newport. You can see the very large front flippers, measurements being taken. It's very important to look at growth rates of the animals. First thing you need to do is flipper tag the animals. It's a very cost-effective and easy thing to do. When you start putting electronics into seawater, you kind of run into problems.
Mm-hmm.
So flipper tags is an easy way to get about finding where the animals go, but you don't really know how they got from one point to the other. You just know they got there.
Now, he's measuring his back. I'm curious how the name leatherback actually came about for turtles.
The animals really provide very poor leather, but the back is not very hard and it's kind of rubbery. They're also called rubber backs and trunk backs.
So it's really not a shell like you would imagine a regular turtle.
Not quite. They're actually evolutionarily very different than most other turtles. Most other turtles, the ribs and the shell are one cohesive unit, but in a leatherback, the shell is above and distinct from the ribs. Leatherback is a very distinct kind of turtle. It's warm-blooded, kind of like mammals, has a fat layer below that shell and above the ribs surrounding the body. It also has anatomical adaptations for living in cold water, such as those very large front flippers and countercurrent heat exchangers in the shoulders to conserve heat when they are in the cold waters, such as up off Newfoundland where they're common. But when they're breeding in the Caribbean, they could quickly overheat, especially being black-colored. And in those areas, the large flippers come into play as a radiator to get rid of the heat in the nesting
Now,
areas.
what are you doing there?
That's
you, isn't it, John?
No, that was Bob Shute, my major professor.
That's you right there, John.
We're trying to get the animal into an area where we can spread its flippers, or I prefer to call them wings because they're actually more like wings. They're more like a penguin flying through the water than a fish or a whale. But we're trying to get the flipper tag into the armpit area of the turtle so that if it ever does show up again, we'll be able to determine which animal it was. So although this isn't very painful to the animal, it does give us a lot of information if the animal ever shows up again.
Is it sort of like tagging a cow's ear or something of that nature?
Exactly.
Okay.
Those tags, in fact, are just stainless steel versions of those tags, and they come from the company that does, these come right off the same punch and press machine as the cow ear tags. That's exactly what they are. The animal doesn't seem to mind it too much. It's like getting your ear pierced. It hurts when it first happens, but after a while, it's not painful. But it does give us a lot of information for relatively small investment of time and money.
Now, are those crocodile tears that you were talking
Yes.
about?
The kidneys in sea turtles aren't extremely functional, and drinking a lot of seawater, if a human drank a lot of seawater, they'd dehydrate. You have to get rid of the salts. And sea turtles have developed their tear glands in their eyes to develop a very salty, mucousy solution that they secrete through their eyes, and that's how they get rid of the excess salt in their body. One problem with oil spills is that when a sea turtle comes up in an oil spill and breaks the film on the surfaces. It destroys their tear glands, and then they die essentially of kidney failure. That's one problem that sea turtles are having. The marine mammals, it's not so bad because they can detect the oil, but the sea turtles are relatively stupid.
Why do you think that so little information has ever been accumulated on the leatherback turtles in the past? Why haven't people really been able to gather the data about their habits, their migrations, their patterns, you know, all of this kinds of stuff?
The leatherbacks nest in the tropics. Not very few have nested in the United States, even southern Florida. They're more closer to the equator, and there aren't very many developed countries, for one thing. You could probably talk to fishermen and egg robbers, and they could tell you a little bit about them.
Okay.
But they only come up for a very short period of time in their lifespan. Once the sea turtles come out of their nest and go into the sea, only the females ever come back to land. So we do know quite a bit about the nesting females and the hatchlings. But once those animals get into the sea, they're very hard to track. You can't see them. They may not be as abundant as we think. They certainly are more abundant than most people think, but as scientists, our view is a little different. They're not as easy to see as things like whales. They don't travel in groups, and they can probably hold their breath a little bit longer than most whales, and their coloration is such that they're harder to see at sea. Much of my own work deals with flying over the water in an airplane and looking for turtles. We do see a lot of leatherbacks off of Chesapeake Bay in Virginia, but they're just not something that people go out and look for because you can't predict seeing them.
Okay, now what are you doing here? You were just rubbing the back of the turtle and...
We had dried the back of the turtle off, and this is another product from the cattle industry. This is a paint stick that they used to mark cattle, and I have shirts from about this era, 1980, early 1980s, that still have that stuff in my shirts. It doesn't come out of cloth.
It's permanent, huh? Is that what I'm hearing?
It works pretty well. And what we had hoped was if we had people on airplanes out looking for turtles, that maybe they could see the numbers on the back. Bob Shoup does a lot of work on Cumberland Island, Georgia, and there was one animal, a loggerhead, that I had painted, and he said that he could still see the paint on it a year later. And in Virginia, I had one animal that I painted a number on the back, and we caught it a year later, and its little flipper tags had fallen out, but the paint was there, so we knew which animal it was.
Wow, that sure is indelible. What a great shot of the turtle's face. Now, you also did something else up there. You put a little white tag with numbers on. What was that?
Yeah, I had started to experiment with freeze branding. It's kind of like branding a cattle with a hot poker, but this was using a freezing technique.
And it's painless.
And it's painless, especially to most reptiles that are not sensitive to cold. And in the hopes that in a few weeks the pigmented cells would die and it would just leave little white numbers there. Unfortunately, none of these animals have ever been recaptured, so I don't know whether it worked or not. I know that on loggerheads, if you freeze a small area, it will lose its pigment. But whether it would be clear enough on the numbers, I'm not sure.
Now, is this to test whether or not the numbers are going to actually
Now, we know the numbers are going to stay
what?
on, but these animals being very dark colored and are not used to being out in full sun, they would overheat very, very quickly and die in a matter of minutes.
Okay, and that's part of why you're covering him up also?
Exactly. We had to wait for a piece of equipment to come in, so we covered it with a light-covered wet cloth. Also, the black deck on that ship was quite hot also, so we tried to keep things as wet and cool as possible.
Now, how many of you are actually pulling this turtle?
The 4 or 5 people probably it takes to try to move them. It's a little bit harder than dead weight to move because you got the flailing flippers. You can't get near them very easily because if the flippers catch you in certain areas, it can hurt quite badly. And in fact, if they hit you in some parts of the back of your leg, it could break a bone.
Is that
They're very powerful.
They're that powerful?
They're very powerful swimmers.
Wow. Now, what's this actually going on here?
This is the radio transmitter, the first one that I developed. And I'm sticking it on with a little bit of grease on a suction cup in the hopes that it obviously doesn't hurt the animal. And unfortunately, this certain transmitter fell off in a few about 5 minutes, and it had slidden all the way off the back of the animal.
Oh, all
And
that work.
I knew that's what happened because the face of the suction cup was all orange. Fortunately, I developed other methods to keep the transmitters on the animal for more time, and we got some good data on movement and surfacing behavior of the
And
animals.
there he goes back into his home. Oh, that's wonderful. Fascinating work that both of you are doing. I think what we're going to do first is let's take a quick break, and we're going to come right back then and talk more with John Keinath and Chrissy Luginbuhl about the preservation and the endangered species of the leatherback turtle. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, Junior, let's watch some home movies of our leatherback family.
Great, Pop.
There's Uncle Harry. Harry's munching on some jellyfish.
What's that plastic bag doing in the ocean? Why is Harry going after the plastic? He's going to choke on it.
That's why we have to warn people not to throw the plastic into the ocean or on our beaches.
Throw plastic in the garbage and not on our beaches. For further information, contact the David Luginbuhl Research Institute for Endangered Species.
This in your life, you tell one person of something or other, and doors open up and brand new possibilities open up. Best thing about Metaphysically Speaking, I guess I'd have to say that it's sharing with people all of the wisdoms, the insights, the alternatives, the possibilities that exist. That's what I'd say. Welcome back. We're talking with Chris Luginbuhl and John Keinath about the endangered species of turtles, particularly the leatherback turtle. And why are all these turtles so endangered at this point? I know ecologically we are at disaster's brink, I think, but the turtles especially, what's so special for their endangerment?
Well, the largest turtle in the world had died in the country of Wales last year. And I went over there with a cameraman, a professional photographer, and a newspaper reporter to find out what may have contributed to the death.
Mm-hmm.
And while we were over there and they were doing the necropsy, we did find a plastic bag blocking the small intestine, at the entrance into the small intestine. So we can't say for sure whether the turtle had actually died from ingestion of plastics, but it certainly, you couldn't go to the bathroom. I'm sure it would be for a long
Most
period of
definitely.
time. The turtle had drowned in a fisherman's net, so we knew it had drowned, but I mean, with a plastic bag in an animal.
Okay, now you've got that on film, don't you?
We do have it on film
Let's
as well.
take a look at that.
Sure.
Okay, let's take a look at what was happening with that.
This is an area right here where they're opening up stomach area.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The leatherback is most susceptible of the species of sea turtles to swallowing plastic because they feed almost exclusively on jellyfish.
There's the plastic.
And when you see the plastic floating in the water, it does look quite a bit like jellyfish.
It certainly can, yes, and I know, oh, look at that,
There's
my
a picture
gosh.
of plastic.
And that was that considered the death of, the cause of death for that particular
that animal
turtle?
drowned,
It had drowned.
but
Okay.
there are certain individual specimens that have been found around the world that are loaded with plastic.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there's one picture of a loggerhead turtle that has about 25 feet of plastic hanging out of its mouth that was dead on the beach. There's no question that that's what killed that loggerhead. And in fact, I have eyewitness accounts of loggerheads off of Virginia that have large pieces of plastic hanging out of their mouth, trying to tear it loose with their front flippers.
Oh, that's
But they have
terrible.
these projections in their throat such that things like jellyfish don't come back out, and the same thing is true with plastic.
Right, the plastic will stay within their body.
Fortunately, the United States just passed a rule called MARPOL for marine pollution, so that it is against the law to dump this type of stuff into the ocean within certain miles of shore. So that should be helpful.
Well, now, in the 10 years that you've both been doing your research and your tracking of the leatherbacks, what kinds of findings have you discovered?
We've looked at movements off of Narragansett, Rhode Island, surfacing behavior, which is very important if you fly in an airplane, like I said we do in Chesapeake Bay, and look for turtles, because you can't see the turtles when they're below the surface of the water. So if you can see a lot of turtles, you have to account for those animals that are below the surface of the water that you have not seen. So if you look at how much time the animal spends at the surface, it will tell you how many animals you probably didn't see. There is some statistical probabilities there, but you can usually figure that if you saw 2 animals, there were probably more that you didn't see. So we use that data. Also, we look at animals that are in the wild. How long can a turtle hold its breath? Some people take a sea turtle, and hold it underwater and see how long it lives.
Oh, dear.
But you really need to know what the animals are doing in the wild. And there's really no substitute for looking at the animals in the wild. So that's another thing that we've looked at. We've also looked at internal body temperature, specifically of the leatherback. And the leatherbacks can hold their body temperature quite a bit above the ambient water temperature, which means that they're producing heat in their body, and they can regulate the heat. So they're kind of like a human or any other mammal in that they can regulate their body temperature. And this is why we're seeing leatherbacks up off of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, Canada. And in fact, it was only within the last few years that we became aware of so many leatherbacks up in those areas. And there was just an article in the Marine Turtle newsletter where there are so many leatherbacks that the fishermen are starting to have contests to see who can bring the biggest one in. Unfortunately, most of those animals are dying. So the local scientists have made an issue of trying other ways to get fishermen to help out, and they're starting a tagging project. So it becomes very cooperative between the science and the fishermen, and it's a copacetic situation that helps everybody.
It almost sounds, John and Chris, from what you've been discovering, that the turtles don't fit the standard characteristics of being a reptile.
More or less. Some of the turtles, like the leatherbacks and so forth, most sea turtles are quick, which most people don't think of a turtle anyway of being quick. Little lizards can run fast. But they're ecologically similar to marine mammals. The leatherback specifically being similar to a humpback whale in that it has these very long front flippers for getting rid of heat in the hot latitudes where they breed, but they have heat conserving mechanisms for when they go to feed in the cooler areas. One of the prime jellyfish food sources of the leatherback is the Arctic jellyfish, or the lion's mane, the big ones you see on the coast, down even into New England, the big orange ones that can get up to 9 feet across. And that's the major food source for the leatherback. We don't see those in tropical areas. They have to dive very deeply. The leatherback has been found recently to dive almost to a mile deep, and that's deeper than any marine mammal, farther than sperm whales even go to look for the giant squid. And it's the deepest diving, air-breathing vertebrate. The sea turtles are vulnerable because they do have to come to the surface to breathe. That is one of their downfalls with the hard-shell turtles, because the shrimp industry drowns many turtles each year, and that's the primary cause for the Kemp's Ridley decline and probable extinction.
That's amazing. Now, Chris, you just came back from a couple of weeks up in Rhode Island or so, didn't you?
Yes.
Out of Newport.
Yeah.
What was going on for you there in your recent research?
Well, they haven't caught any leatherbacks yet this year.
Okay.
I'm hoping that they do soon, so I can get in touch with John, and John can bring up the satellite transmitter. We're hoping that we can track one from Newport by the satellite. We're very excited about that. I guess I just wanted to put in a plug for funding, because we really do need funding. I mean, we're able to put a man on the moon, yet we really don't know how the leatherback turtle operates. We don't know.
We still have so much unexplored right here on Earth.
Yes, and it really is a mystery how the animal can go down to such great depths, how they can travel all over the world. It's just a lot of mystery, and we're hoping that people will reveal themselves.
What plans do you have for your further research?
Well, we want to continue on if we can get large corporations behind us, you know, and
you already have so many prestigious organizations and people working with you. It's wonderful. So much of the scientific community is behind you all the way, Chris.
I'm very fortunate.
Yes, you are.
I just hope we can keep affording to keep it going. You know, we want to do a movie on the project, and I'm also, as you know, very grateful that I thank God every day that I'm sober. And to me, you know, no matter how far down the tubes you go in life, there's hope if you're sober. I mean, believe me, it's hard for me to believe I'm still here. very hard. And I say,
And not just here, but also a real inspiration, I think, for a lot of people, and
I
certainly a lot of causes.
feel like you're on a mission when you've been through it. You want to do what you can.
Yes.
You know, and,
I understand that. John, where is your personal research taking you?
Right now I'm working in Chesapeake Bay, and I like to get off on these little projects with Chris, like going to the Caribbean and tracking leatherbacks. But coming up with funding is a problem. We've been lucky that Chris has been able to fund part of these projects, and we've had funding from the Virginia Game and Inland Fish Endangered Species, which essentially are donations of tax refunds from Virginia taxpayers, and all of my research right now is being funded through those tax refund write-offs. And we've also been funded through the Met's turtle candies, and they helped us very much in our expedition to the Caribbean to track the leatherback. And that was a very interesting opportunity for me, and I think is going to be very interesting data to a lot of people.
Oh, I think that's wonderful. I truly think that both of you, what you're doing is, as Chris puts it very beautifully, a real mission. And even Governor O'Neill, I know, has been a very avid supporter of your efforts, and we certainly are asking that all who do believe in the cause of helping all endangered species will also be helping out your cause as well. It certainly is admirable, and we don't want our planet to find any more devastation, especially if we can start to clean up the water as well as the air and keep these beautiful creatures alive. So thank you so much for sharing all of your time and your energy and all of those wonderful footages that you have of the underwater shots and the overwater shots of the tracking. And what we're going to do is we're going to keep track of both of you as well, so that we can do part 2 and find out the further findings from your own research on the leatherbacks and the other endangered species. So thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks for showing
Thanks
interest.
so much for joining us on Metaphysically Speaking. And we ask you to think about the endangered species. Think about what you can do to take your part in cleaning up the environment. And may you always walk in the light, metaphysically speaking. Till next week, may God bless all that you do.